I have some friends who did change their driver's license because they were actually just so excited to be living in like a state that they thought was cooler. So they were like, oh, I could have a California license. That's so cool. But what you're doing is essentially putting proof the opposite direction to show, oh, I moved to California. I even got a new driver's license in California. You want all the proof to show, oh, I don't live here. I'm doing a temporary assignment here.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Nomadicare Show. I'm Laura. I am the founder of Nomadicare. And here is my co-host, Jacob. He builds all the fancy technology and is my husband.
Hello.
Hello. What is the topic today?
Week's question comes from Noah. Noah's question is, how do I qualify for tax-free money
Ooh, perfect.
as a traveler?
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Noah. So this is a really important question for any traveler to figure out. One of the perks, I think, and one of the more exciting parts of being a travel healthcare worker is that a big chunk of what goes on our paycheck each Friday is tax-free money. We do not have to pay taxes on it. So it's like this instant, depending on the tax bracket, between 20 or 30 or more percent raise just for not having to pay taxes. And I think one of the common misconceptions is that travel healthcare workers get tax-free money just because they're travelers. Like it just comes with it. But there actually are really important things that you have to do to qualify. Because who is granting us tax-free status? It's the IRS. It's not like the staffing agencies have.
Wait, I thought the recruiters.
Yeah.
I thought they just
Magically gave tax-free money.
Yeah.
No, I wish we
wow.
were that powerful, or that recruiters were that powerful. But no, the recruiters and the staffing agencies are following guidelines from the IRS, and there's part of the IRS tax code that allows for certain people to get this tax-free money.
Yeah.
And if we don't qualify for it by doing certain things, they should not be giving us the tax-free money. And if they do give us the tax-free money and we didn't actually do the right steps, well, let's say we get audited as a traveler, we will owe all those taxes back. And we'll have to pay penalties and back taxes because we didn't pay them at the right time. And so being a travel healthcare worker where you work 13-week short-term assignments does not by itself qualify you for tax-free money. You can do that without qualifying for tax-free money and just get whatever the pay package is and fully pay taxes on it. And then you don't have to follow any of these rules. But if you want to be one of the travelers who gets tax-free money, the majority of us fall under one bucket. So I'm going to talk about that bucket of rules that most of us have to follow. There's exceptions to the rules. There's always like nuanced, individualized things, which is why everything you listen to, including this, will say, this is for educational purposes only. Talk to a CPA. Make sure your situation falls into this, or that the tax code didn't change since the time we recorded this or something like that.
Yeah.
But in general, most of us fall under this. Number one, you need a tax home. And establishing a tax home somewhere essentially means this is my permanent place of residence that I've paid taxes at, that I have significant expenses at. This is my home. And there's a list of rules that kind of go into establishing a tax home, which I'm not going to go as deep into. But in general, you need a home that you're paying mortgage at or you're paying rent inside of. And that rent needs to be what's called fair market value. So it's not like slipping your dad $50 a month to rent a room in a family's house. That doesn't necessarily qualify. It would be actually paying a real rent for that area. You have real expenses. You have a life there. You have a home. Now, if you get a travel assignment, what the IRS is looking for is, do you need a second home? So is this assignment so far away from that first tax home that you actually need to have a second home in order to work here? And so that needs to be a not commutable distance. Some staffing agencies follow a rule and they say you need to be at least 50 miles away from your tax home in order to qualify. But that's just their internal rule. So they have some kind of structure to it. The IRS doesn't even say a number. They just say it needs to be a reasonable distance. And what reasonable means really depends on what judge you get, what auditor you get when they're auditing you. So you want it to be very obvious. I needed a second home. I could not have commuted back home.
Yeah.
And so if you need a second home, then you have to actually get a second home. So they're looking for the distance to be far away and that you literally have two places and you're paying expenses on two places. They call that part of the rule duplicating expenses. And the part that I think a lot of recruiters leave out or don't know is it's not just like, oh, I can have an electric bill at my parents' house and that qualifies. And then I can go, live somewhere else. The auditor is going to actually look to see, do you have like rent in your first tax home? And are you paying rent in the second tax home? Are you duplicating expenses? So we actually have a reason to need to give you tax-free money to help you pay for housing.
Yeah.
So duplicating expenses at fair market values, having the place you're working far enough away where you literally cannot commute back home. And then number 3, they don't want to see you abandon that tax home. So that place that was your original place, they want to see that you actually go home sometimes. And what they deem to be reasonable, again, in the code, it doesn't say a certain number, but from previous audits. So what kind of like the thing that most people say in the industry is you're probably safe if you go home around 30 days a year. And it does not have to be consecutive. You could go home a little bit this month, a little bit around Christmas, a little bit throughout the year. But the auditor wants to see that you're not kind of trying to trick the tax system and you really do have a home that you go home to. And so if you think of it a little bit bigger picture, the whole reason the IRS cares about this is they don't like losing tax money because that's how, the government gets paid for everything. So the IRS doesn't want to give tax-free money just because.
Yeah.
They're giving it to you because, essentially you have a home that you have expenses at and you're going away on what's more or less a business trip. You have a job away from your home. And so they're helping subsidize or pay for or give you a break on part of your meals and incidentals, your food that cost more away from home, and your housing that now you have duplicate expenses. It costs more to do this job. And it's the same way if you own a company, you can get a tax break by going on a business trip. Or if you work for a company and they send you to a conference, they'll probably pay for your hotel. But then on their, documents, they'll get to write that off. That hotel is a business cost, so they're not paying taxes on it. It's the same kind of principle. You live one place, you're going away to work somewhere else, and it's like a business trip, and this is their way of giving you a tax break.
Also, too, tell me if I'm wrong, but you said best practice to come home in between assignments, or in between the time that you're away. It's also good to also create income when you're back home too, right? That's why sometimes CPAs who are familiar with travel taxes will recommend taking a per diem shift or having some type of relationship where you earn money at your tax home too.
Yeah.
I've even seen like part-time jobs doing other things, right? Where you can maybe do a non-clinical role during that time, but that's an important part as well.
Yes, that is a really good idea. The point is kind of like if you get audited, the auditor is going to say, show me proof. So if you have a part-time job somewhere or a per diem job that you're going home to that you're not getting tax-free money on, you're paying full taxes on it, that helps you with all the paperwork you're showing the auditor, that helps you prove this is my home, this is my tax home. I even come back and work here part of the year. So anything you can do to kind of add to that burden of proof, I guess, to show you really deserved that money is a good thing. And then when you're first establishing a tax home, it's not like you can just pick a place on the map and say, that's my tax home. I'm just going to start renting a house there, and by default, that's my tax home. It doesn't work like that either. You have to go to that location, live there for a certain amount of time, have a job that you're paying taxes on, and establish that place as a tax home before you could travel away from it and, have all of these benefits happen.
Yeah, and I've actually read that IRS copy too, and it says things like, place of business, that you have ties to the community, volunteering, or religious institutions, and things like that. But
Yeah.
I want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yes, that is exactly right. Any organization you're a part of that has a zip code in that area, that's a good thing. If
Yeah.
your bank is in that area, it's a good thing. You would never change your driver's license away from that tax home. I have some friends who did change their driver's license because they were actually just so excited to be living in like a state that they thought was cooler. So they were like, oh, I could have a California license. That's so cool. But what you're doing is essentially putting proof the opposite direction to show, oh, I moved to California. I even got a new driver's license in California. You want all the proof to show, oh, I don't live here. I'm doing a temporary assignment here.
Yeah, I
live over there.
Kentucky.
Yeah, wherever it is. Exactly. So yeah, you want to keep everything tied to that home, your
Very cool.
home, and then travel away. And then I think one more thing that's just very related to this, a lot of people don't know this either, is you don't want your tax home to switch to a new location. So sometimes we travel to a place like, let's say, San Francisco, and somebody either falls in love with San Francisco or they fall in love with a person in San Francisco. Whatever it is, they want to stay. And so they're taking travel assignments in this one location, whether it's one place they're extending or more jobs, but it's just in that same location. And suddenly it gets to a point where they've almost been there for an entire year. And so I think that's somewhat common knowledge that once you can't work somewhere for over a year. If you do that, just think about yourself. If you were an IRS auditor, you'd say, hey, that's your home. You're literally living there the entire year. You don't get tax-free money just because you're working somewhere. Figure out a way to not pay rent back home.
Yeah, you're not, quote, traveling for work. You just work in San Francisco now.
It's been a whole year in one zip code. So once you get to that, I think a lot of people know you would have to switch over to be what's called a local traveler, or just a 13-week contract worker in your area where you don't get tax-free money. But I think a lot of people get confused or unsure about how long do I have to go away before I can come back and work in San Francisco and get tax-free money again. And this is another thing, just like I think everything in the IRS, there's not a hard number. They leave words like reasonable and stuff like that in there, so it becomes more up to the auditor. However, what we've seen is what they like to see is if they zoom out and they look over a 2-year period, 24 months, they don't want you to live in one region that's commutable any time over 12 months in a 24-month period. So sometimes staffing agencies will say, oh, you can just go home for 2 weeks and then we can just start you back up over there again. Or some of them will say you can go home for 30 days. Or some will say you can take one 13-week assignment away from San Francisco and then we can just get you right back in there. But per the travel tax experts in the industry, not the staffing agencies, they say if you get audited, there is a higher chance that auditor will not let that fly.
Yeah.
And they'll look at that and say, no, you just keep going back to San Francisco. So then if they looked at a 2-year period and they said, look, you just went away from San Francisco for 30 days out of 2 years, San Francisco is your home, buddy.
Yeah.
You owe us taxes, or even 13 weeks. You're pretty much showing I live in San Francisco and I barely leave it. So you don't want to stay somewhere for that long if you want to keep getting tax-free money.
Yeah, I can't stress enough how important it is to do things like educate yourself on topics like this by watching a podcast like this or reading a blog on a website, or things where you're doing effort and talking to tax professionals, right, that really deeply understand this stuff versus solely relying on your recruiter. We've interviewed hundreds of recruiters, right? It's very clearly that they're not tax experts. And a lot of time their tax knowledge is, what's the right word? Deficient, right? Like
it's like they learned inaccurate information that they're spreading as if it's real. Yeah.
So most of the times your recruiter knows harmful information about travel taxes that will put you in a risky or vulnerable position. So when you are unsure on a topic, consult professionals, do research, and solely don't rely on recruiters. Recruiters and agencies are incentivized to put you into a job, right? That's how everyone makes money in this That's
ecosystem.
yeah, that's how everyone makes money in this market.
Yeah.
And so they will prioritize getting you in a job versus making sure that you are compliant tax wise and de-risking yourself.
Yeah.
So it's important to do
And if you
research
get in
and get
trouble,
knowledge.
if you get audited and the auditor finds out you owe the tax money back, the staffing agency doesn't get in trouble. This is on us as travelers, pretty much solely on us to make sure we're doing it right. The staffing agency has some risk, but it's way less, and it's different what they have to do to be like de-risk themselves.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, recruiters, I would say almost none of them understand this topic very deeply, so they should never be your advisor. H&R Block doesn't understand this. Usually those people are specialized in the state that they're doing taxes in, and this is a multi-state tax, and it's a very nuanced tax rule because, I mean, we're travel healthcare workers. We're a very small percentage of the population, so the average CPA at H&R Block does not know this little nuanced niche in the tax code. So I've heard of a lot of those tax advisors giving really bad information. So it's also try to use the tax advisors, and there's several in our industry that know this industry and take the time to study our audits and specialize in us, because that's just who has the good knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. You want to go to someone who understands our little strange, beautiful world.
Yeah. And you can go to Nomadicare for this, nomadicare.com/tax. And you can get connected with a vetted, certified accountant that understands travel taxes and all the nuances. You can file your taxes with them. You can have consultations to talk about tax homes, little things like that. But yeah, even like you said, H&R Block is not going to be super knowledgeable on the topic. Even like online things like TurboTax, right? They're not going to be built for healthcare travelers, They're, like you said, it's such a small percentage of the users. So TurboTax is going to build their website for a person who just has a normal job that doesn't travel for it.
Yeah.
So you're going to find yourself hitting a few roadblocks, and you can save, a couple bucks trying to file your taxes through TurboTax or going to H&R Block, or you can talk with like somebody who deeply understands travel healthcare taxes, who can file your taxes correctly and make sure everything is just like good, squared away, and you can go to sleep and have peace of mind that you're not going to wake up one day
and they're
have
really
a
good
letter
people
from the IRS.
to, they can file your taxes for sure, but they're really good people also to consult with. If you're like, okay, well, I want to rent out my tax home as an Airbnb for part of the year. Can I do that and still qualify? Or I want to get an RV or do van life. How does that impact me getting duplicate expenses? There's all these little cool scenarios we can do as travelers.
Yeah.
Or I want to rent out my mom's house, but I've never paid her rent before. When do I need to start paying her rent? A bunch of awesome questions, and those tax advisors can answer them, so you set it up correctly and don't find out 2 years later and then you're just like, oh my gosh, if I get audited, like I know I'm probably in trouble. So yeah, but that's a really important question and great question. So thank you to Noah. And
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you, Noah. And that wraps up episode number 11. Thank you for joining us. And you can like and subscribe and follow along. We'll keep answering these great questions to help you become a more empowered traveler. And we will see you next time.
Hello. Never been here before, but I feel like I'm home. Yeah. Put my feet on the road. Meet me over the coast. We got places to go.